We're going to be looking at emphasis. We emphasize what we want people to notice. We emphasize words by saying them louder or more distinctly. We emphasize things we want people to see by painting them bright colors. It's kind of hard to ignore a bright red fire truck. In order to attract readers, every layout needs a focal point. Without one, the viewers quickly move on. But if you have too many points of interest, your reader won't know where to look first and they'll give up. In other words, emphasizing everything basically means you emphasized nothing. Therefore, you need to choose what is the most important element based on the message you're trying to communicate and who your target audience is. Making something large or bold just to have largeness or boldness doesn't really work. A large bad photograph might get a passing glance, but it will leave a negative impression ultimately. After you've chosen the element to emphasize, you can choose any of several methods to call attention to it. As a general rule, a focal point is created when one element differs from the rest. In a layout where everything is vertical, a horizontal element will stand out. A horizontal picture with vertical columns of text, for instance. A small detailed illustration surrounded by a large area of flat color would form a focal point. Something that is singled out or made more prominent has emphasis. An element of a design that dominates or becomes the center of interest has emphasis. Within the visual components of a page, emphasis is applied to individual parts, such as a word or phrase, by changing their appearance and making them stand out. Many people find the principle of emphasis and contrast to be the same. Often they work together and go hand in hand, but they are indeed distinctly different principles. What makes them different is that determining the visual element to emphasize involves intellectual analysis in 1. Determining what is the most important information, and then 2. Proceeding to visually stress the important information. Contrast, on the other hand, concentrates primarily on developing strong visual differences between visual elements on the page. Emphasis proceeds in a logical manner. Emphasis can be created by using all of the various elements and principles of design. You can create a focal point by making one element of the design more prominent or eye-catching than the others. With line, if you use a design composed of horizontal lines, the vertical line becomes the focal point. When you're using shape, a square stands out from a group of circles or organic shapes. How about mass? Well, the physical or visually heavier element or piece commands more attention. What about texture? Something like embossing adds tactile interest and emphasis. And how about color? A splash of color or a strong change in the value in an otherwise gray piece will always draw the eye first. Emphasis and the principles of design. You can use the arrangement of the page components to create a focal point or visual hierarchy of dominant and subordinate elements. Balance. A perfectly symmetrical piece may have no focal point because each element is equally emphasized. Radial balance generally draws the eye in first to the center point of the design. Proximity. A part of the design that is isolated from other parts can become a focal point. Alignment. The eye is naturally drawn to a point or near the center of the page, giving elements in that area perceived importance. Repetition. Repeating an image or a word can establish its importance. Contrast. You can set words or phrases in a contrasting bold type or italics to give them emphasis. And of course, white space. Use white space to isolate elements and give them emphasis. Emphasis is an important concept that touches on all aspects of graphic design and page composition. It simplifies the reader's task and helps them to pick out the essentials in your message faster than having to wade through non-emphasized information. An additional benefit to emphasizing elements on your page is that they are more visually interesting to look at. Successful emphasis of an element is achieved by making it look somehow different from the other elements on the page, such as making an emphasized word bigger and or bolder than an unemphasized word. You need to decide what is most important. Almost all pages benefit from the use of emphasis to help structure the visual space and to clarify presentation of the information. But how do you know what to emphasize? Well, you need to begin by deciding which words or phrases or graphics are the most important. You should also consider what parts of your message might attract the largest amount of your audience. Later, you can emphasize those words or phrases or graphics as a visual hook and draw in your viewers. Once you have decided which visual elements to emphasize and in which order, Then you have developed a visual hierarchy game plan for your page. The term visual hierarchy simply refers to the arrangement of visual elements such as type and images on the page according to their order of importance and consequently emphasis. To establish visual hierarchy, you need to analyze and find out what you should emphasize. Ask yourself the following questions. This may help. What is the primary message? Which element best communicates this primary message? Is there a secondary message? Which element best communicates the secondary message? Is there a tertiary message? Which element best communicates this tertiary message? Which visual element is most interesting? Which visual element is most likely to attract or spark the reader's attention? Is there a piece of information which, if unemphasized or unclear, could undermine the usefulness of your message? What, if any, information can you afford to delete from your page? Simpler is often better. Simple designs make it easy for you to establish a clear visual hierarchy. Just because a design is simple doesn't mean it can't also be sophisticated. Graphic designers use visual hierarchy in their designs to direct the reader's attention to key points, starting with the page's primary focal point. A focal point is the visual element or part of the page that is most emphasized and therefore where the reader's eye goes first. Secondary and tertiary focal points are called accents because they obviously accent other important points on the page. Emphasize only the most important information if you can. Limit the amount of content on your layouts and keep them as simple as possible. What is emphasis in a design? Well, emphasis in a design provides the focal point of the piece, as we've said. It's a way of making the element that is most important stand out in the design. Emphasis is sometimes called dominance. When you're using emphasis in a design, one of the biggest mistakes the designers can make is trying to make everything in a design stand out. When everything has equal emphasis, at best, it can make the piece appear busy, and at worst, the design will be boring and unappealing. Instead, focus on creating visual hierarchy in your designs. All your designs need to do is put emphasis on the correct elements, such as a headline text or the main graphical element, and so on and so forth. To create emphasis, you can place a small element, such as a line of reverse type or a small photo, in the middle of a large area of black or white. You can surround an illustration with a lot of text. You could use a series of evenly spaced square photos next to an outlined photo with an unusual shape. You could put an important bit of copy on a curve or on an angle while keeping all the other type in straight columns. You could use bold black type for a header or subhead and much more lighter type for all the other text. You could place a large picture next to a small bit of copy. How about putting a shape that appears to be three-dimensional or a black and white photo against a field of flat color? You could reverse the headline out of black or colored boxes. You could use colored type in an unusual face for the most important information. You could put a list of benefits or a sidebar, some sort of short article that supports a longer one, in a tinted box. Too much of a good thing. The problem with novices is that they will try to apply the principle of emphasis to everything in their layouts, and they'll end up overusing it. This is actually very common with many of the design principles. Very few people are natural designers with an innate mastery of design principles. Most aspiring designers have to learn design as a skill through practice, practice, and more practice. Learning a skill means that missteps will occur and mistakes will happen. My advice to you is to accept that as becoming a skilled designer. It takes time. Forgive your mistakes and aspire to do better. You may be able to avoid missteps by keeping in mind that it's easy to overuse design principles. Too much of a good thing can ruin a design as quickly as not applying the design principles at all to the page. Keep your message as simple as possible and avoid emphasizing everything on the page. Restraint is necessary for clear communication. Let's go ahead and look at some ads and talk about them. The first ad we're going to look at is this Toshiba storage device ad, and it uses emphasis in several ways. The first and most apparent use is the black storage card displaying the actual product at actual size. It's clearly dwarfed by this towering high truck. The visual message is immediately apparent that this tiny chip can store lots of things. Emphasis is used in the color choice. The black jumps out at the viewer in the otherwise monochromatic ad layout. The monochromatic green format catches the viewer's attention since it is such a large amount of green, but the product shot stands out since it is displayed in another color and pretty much centered in the format. The green supporting artwork leads and draws the user to the product immediately. The secondary element being emphasized is the Toshiba logo, which is shown much smaller, but the complementary use of red also takes precedent form from the rest of the items. The next ad that we're going to look at is the Simon's hearing device ad. This uses emphasis by making its product an actual photo and showing that as the only item in color. It is very cleverly incorporated into the hand-drawn sketch of the wind chimes, but because of the difference in color and rendering, it gets immediate attention. The tagline is "Start hearing life again." It's supported by the visual and emphasized as the third element, while the Simon's logo and the second emphasized element because of the color and the size. The ad is well balanced symmetrically, and the viewer is directed from the graphics in the upper left to the logo and the tagline in the lower right. Also supportive of the entire ad's theme is the small gray tagline under the logo, which refers to the hearing aids as hearing instruments. This ties in the use of a wind instrument within the ad. Here is an ad for micro lamp. It uses emphasis in an important way. Immediately the viewer's eye is drawn to the brightest object in the composition, where one of their products is carefully incorporated into the firefly. Setting the lighted area against the dark nighttime backdrop reinforces the light, and it creates a dramatic and simple layout, and certainly makes you look at it and draws you into the surreal world that surrounds the firefly. Main emphasis is on the product, while secondary emphasis goes to the thin keyline box that contains the company's logo and the tagline. This advertisement is clean and simple, but certainly effective. And our final example is for the movie poster The Spirit. It is a very dramatic rendering that uses a muted color palette for the city buildings, which are actual text, as you can see. Everything appears dirty and grimy and allows the movie title and the billowing tide to take center stage. The red, of course, is a color that we tend to focus on first anyways, but here it's framed in such a dark and simple layout that it really is emphasized. Placement and graphical treatment of the various elements all blend seamlessly together, and because of their placement lead the viewer's eye down through the poster. Primary, secondary, and tertiary elements are all displayed just as the designer intended, calling attention to all of those elements in the order that they wanted you to see them. This poster combines emphasis techniques, use of color, position in the layout, and size to successfully make an eye-catching poster.